Hello, my geeslings. This is a dreaded take 2 of the introduction because in the first one, apparently, I forgot to turn on the mic. Anyway, I just dropped off my actual geeslings, Pins the Cornish Rex and Mishka the Vizsla, at the vet for a dental cleaning. And when the tech was intaking them, he asked me if I wanted them to perform CPR if anything horrible goes on during their dental exam, and now I'm terrified that they're both going to die, but hopefully they don't. So fingers crossed. This is the introduction to episode 13 with Ethan Hoppe. I think it's episode 13. I hope it's episode 13 because I'm not going to do a take 3 of this. But Ethan is one of my best friends. I've known him since we were 10, and he was also featured on episode 2. I hope it was episode 2 because I'm not doing a take 3. And in episode 2, we talk about his time in Air Force boot camp because he's a violinist in the Air Force. And if you're anything like me, you had no idea that there were violinists in the Air Force or the Army or Navy or any other branch of the military. But lo and behold, there are. He exists. He's a real person. And in that episode, I wanted to talk more about the violin than we actually got to. So that was the point of this episode. And the first 15 minutes or so are background information. So what a military violinist actually does. And we also talked a bit about Ethan's training at Northwestern and Yale. Then we got into more of the conceptual or theoretical or intellectual discussion that I'd hoped to have originally. So we talk about how a musician's abilities and focus change as they mature, the evolution of the violin itself. They used to use gut strings, now they're using metal strings. Who would have known? How he views classical pieces as poems. The theory behind blind auditions, how he deals with stage fright, practicing while he dreams. I'm not a serious I'm not a violinist at all, but I'm not a serious musician, even though I play the drums. But I do listen to music. That's not really what I get out of this episode, though, or these conversations I have with Ethan. It's more just that he's phenomenal at what he does. And I think being phenomenal at something, at anything, carries over into other areas of one's life. So hearing how he thinks about the violin, how he deals with the challenges of practicing or performing, they help me think, even if I'm not doing it consciously, about other areas in my life. So how he deals with stage fright as a violinist. I think actually, so I performed my sister's wedding ceremony last 2 weeks ago. And in our episode, he talked about how, well, I think this is what he talked about, how he just focuses more on the physical symptoms of what he's experiencing rather than the psychological fear. Maybe he's already practiced, so he knows the material, but really what he has to deal with is his racing heartbeat or these other physical manifestations of his nervousness. And though I wasn't thinking about this conversation consciously as I went into my sister's wedding as the officiant, as I sat there and people, it wasn't a huge wedding, but as people were coming in, I just sort of took a few deep breaths, noticed my heart was racing, and just focused on calming that down. And then the ceremony itself went very smoothly. So these conversations, I don't know, they have a way of leaking into your life or my life in ways that aren't anticipated. So even if you're not a violinist, even if you just absolutely hate music, I still think there's plenty you can get out of it. So I hope you enjoy this episode. So last time we did our podcast, and my intention had been to talk about violin, but we didn't really get to it because we ended up speaking mostly about the Air Force boot camp. And it's funny, I saw Top Gun yesterday. Have you seen it yet?
No, I haven't actually. I haven't seen the original either.
Oh yeah. Well, I saw. I know that's the Navy, but anyway, it was
Is
funny.
it the Navy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Apparently, the Navy has the second biggest air force in the world
Yeah.
after the actual Air Force, which is pretty funny. But we talked about your time in Air Force boot camp or basic training
Yeah.
to be a violinist in the Air Force. So, but we didn't get to talk too much about violin, and that's mainly what I wanted to talk about today. So, when I first heard that you were going to be a violinist in the Air Force, and I'm sure most people think this when they hear it, they think the Air Force has violinists. So,
Yeah.
why, and what do you do?
So actually, all the service branches have they all have bands, but the Air Force, the Army, and the Marines all have string ensembles. And we're all based in DC, and basically we're support our mission is to uh, basically represent the Air Force, represent the country, and we do a lot of music that supports Washington D.C. functions. So like we play uh, at Air Force, like higher up Air Force events for officers that are in the D.C. area. We play at the White House sometimes, although that's more the Marines are like the first call to the White House. That's their sort of duties, but sometimes they can't do it. Um,
But you strummed at the White House Christmas event, right?
yeah, actually, that was my first. Um, that was my first job. The first thing I did in the Air Force was playing at the White House. So
I like to think that you're a spy now and just not telling me, but that's what you're really doing. You're
actually,
you're like you're like strumming at the White House, listening in on Putin and that sort of thing.
so we played this event for the Qatar U.S. 50th anniversary. This was like a couple weeks ago, and
The
after
50th anniversary of what?
of their relationship, diplomatic relationships.
Okay.
Uh, so after we played, uh, which was well, we were the act that followed Ashanti. The so she was like all like super amplified backup dancers twerking and everything on stage, and there was like I don't know like a huge floor of people. It was kind of a dinner party, so she was performing and everybody was eating, and then she finished, and there's 15 of us unamplified, just like on the floor, and everybody was talking and eating, and like they couldn't hear us at all. It was a huge letdown. But anyways, uh, afterwards they gave us good like sort of gift bags as gift exchange, and inside were these Apple Watches. Uh,
Oh, the
yeah,
Qatar. I don't know what they're called. Qatarians,
yeah, they gave us Apple
C-
Watches, and so at first we were
complete with listening devices like bugs to listen in on
exactly.
everything.
So actually, we were not technically going to be allowed to keep it because you can't accept gifts from foreign governments above a certain amount. But it's like $10 under the amount of like $410 or something. So it's all legal that we can keep them, but I don't think that's a good idea.
Are you keeping it? Are you
No,
using an Apple Watch
it's
now?
it's unopened, so I'm going to return it for store credit.
Nice.
Yeah, we actually wouldn't be able to wear them with our uniform because of the color. Like you can't wear bright colors with the uniform. So, anyways, uh, so that's an example of one of the functions we would do, and we also do concerts in the DC area that uh, they're always free. So we just like put on concerts for people, and usually a part of the program, if we're doing like a conventional classical music program, uh, we'll like do the anthem and like have something about the Air Force because that's kind of the point is to represent the Air Force and sort of just have outreach to the community and sort of facilitate goodwill between the community and the Air Force. So, uh, yeah, that's what we're doing.
Cool. So before we talk about some of the type of material that's more interesting to me, uh, one thing I'd like to go over is briefly how somebody picks up a violin as a child and then ends up in the Air Force as a violinist. So you've been playing violin and music for as long as I've known you. So when we met at 10 years old, I think you already played 5 instruments by that point, since you come from such a musical family.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, my whole
what does it look like?
well, everybody's path is a little bit different. Because my dad's a cellist and all of my siblings played, uh, you know, music was just sort of part of what we did growing up, and we all took lessons starting from like 4 or 5 years old.
In
Um,
a variety of instruments.
yeah, well, we all played a string instrument and then played piano uh, as well. Piano is like it really helps to be able to play piano, especially later on, just to know, uh, just to have a different approach that you can have. There's because string instruments are always single line sort of melody type things, and piano you can play more harmony, so you get a different view of the music. Uh, but yeah, I got into a bunch of different instruments, in middle school playing trumpet and drums and stuff because I liked jazz. Um, but well, I kind of just stuck with violin. I was most serious about violin, so uh, yeah, I started getting serious about playing in seventh or
Professionally, you
eighth.
mean?
Uh, well, even just like in seventh or eighth grade, just when I switched teachers and the teacher was demanding like that more commitment, so I was started practicing like um, you know 3 or 4 hours a day, and that's
And and by that point, though, it might be what you're doing. It might be called like being in a studio or something like that, where the teacher has lots of serious students, and you're interacting with serious students and playing in groups on the weekends and going to camps and concerts and things like
yeah.
that. It's not
So
just yeah.
yeah, I'm not just practicing on my own. So in high school, I was in a pre-college program that every Saturday for like from 8 till 4 or whatever, we went and we took theory and played chamber music, played an orchestra, music history, uh, and every Friday night we had studio class, which was like everybody in my teacher's studio just performed for each other because performing is, so much a part of it's not just practicing, performing is kind of the point of it all. So we gave practice performances for each other. And So it was pretty intense. And that's what I mean by serious because my teacher basically she trains everybody as if they're going to be a soloist, like perform concertos with orchestra and have a career like that. But realistically, you know, not everybody can do that because there's only one uh, per, you know, they can't, there's just not that many. And it's really hard to have that kind of a career. You need to get to a certain place with your playing and have um, you know, and have certain opportunities to be able to like have an actual career doing that. So not everybody is trained that way. You know, different people, have different expectations growing up, but that was just the way that my teacher trained people. And I mean, I found that, because that is sort of, uh, that's the most demanding of you as a player playing a concerto. That's kind of uh, just with classical technique and everything, that is kind of the hardest thing that you have to do in some ways, just to stand up and play on your own. Um, I mean, every other sort of aspect, playing an orchestra, playing chamber music, and uh, they all have their challenges, but playing concertos really prepares you for everything. So uh, I found
And
that,
then
that's helpful, been helpful for my playing.
and then you went to Northwestern And did you major in music?
Yeah. So
So you made
I majored in music. So basically, I just, you know, I continued those classes that I was taking on Saturdays, music history, music theory, um, those kinds of music classes, and playing orchestra and chamber music. But I spent most of my time practicing. Uh,
and then after Northwestern, you went to Yale and you got 2 master's degrees. And what were those 2 in?
yeah, so uh, Masters of Music. The first was Masters of Music, and the second was Master of Musical Arts, which is just like the Masters of Music, but they have a program that allowed me to stay an extra year, or actually go back an extra year because I took a year in between. Um, I did a Fulbright in Israel, and I studied with a teacher there, and did some concerts there for the year, and then I went back, and it just gave me an opportunity to continue studying with my teacher, because lessons is really the meat of all of these. The degree isn't really that meaningful because it's just a piece of paper, and really nobody really, I mean, it doesn't really matter when you're giving a performance what your degrees are, you know. It's just
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I noticed the same. So I just got a master's degree from Columbia, and it's very easy once you're accepted in a program to get the degree that's required of you, or that you're. But just getting the degree doesn't mean that you've learned anything, really. I got through a lot of high school without having learned anything. I was just thinking this morning, were you in my AP US class with Miss Chipman?
no, I had Miss Kaler.
Okay, so I was just thinking about it this morning. I got, after the first day of AP US, I had an F because our only assignment was, no, it wasn't even an assignment. In class, we talked about our summer reading, and we had to say one thing. Everybody just had to make one contribution in the whole class period. And I just sat there with my arms crossed and like didn't say a single thing. And that was our one grade, and I got an F because of that. And she called my parents to let them know that I had an F after the first day. But that's not what I was thinking about. What I was thinking about was we had president's quizzes. Do you
Yeah.
remember that? Where we had to like memorize every president, who they ran against, and their parties.
Okay.
And we had, I don't know, quizzes maybe once a week where we had to learn like 4 presidents or something like that, so that by the end of the year we knew all of the presidents. And I never learned like past George Washington, so I failed every single president's quiz. And I was just thinking this morning, like, how is it that I managed to get through that whole year without once thinking, I should sit down for like 2 minutes and learn these presidents? But I still passed and have made it this far in life, with C's in AP US history. So, but
Wow.
anyways, that's just my anecdote about the degree. So you got the 2 degrees from Yale and did the Fulbright, and lo and behold, soon after graduating, the pandemic hits.
Right.
And I know that you've already gone to an orchestra in Miami that's sort of a feeder to the larger orchestras where you practice while you're taking auditions. But then the pandemic hits and all the orchestras stop taking auditions because they're all somewhat suspended.
Right.
So that's a big blow. And you have, I don't know if it was a year or 2 years before the first auditions came, and they were for the military orchestras, and then you end up getting a very sought after position with the Air Force, which will be sort of a feeder then in the future if you want to leave to like New York or Chicago or LA or some other symphony like that.
Yeah, pretty much. It was a year. Uh, it was a year and a half between I had an audition in February of 2020, and then the next one, the Air Force audition was at the end of June 2021, and it was one of the first auditions. Yeah. So it was nice. I mean, people in the service bands, because concerts and everything were suspended for everyone. So a lot of orchestras just couldn't pay their musicians. Like the Metropolitan Opera of New York, you know, one of the highest paid orchestras in the country, just all of a sudden those people had no paycheck and no job. So that's kind of tough in New York. Whereas people in the Army did not stop paying or the Air Force, the military did not stop paying their servicemen.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very stable and it's nice to sort of write out the uncertainties in this position right now. And I mean, yeah, I have.
All right, awesome. Okay, so now I want to get to more of the good stuff. So I've known you for 20 years then, I guess, and I've seen you play. So that would have been concertos when I saw you play Isai or Paganini or things like.
Well, those, those are just Isai wrote solo. Those were unaccompanied works, and so yeah, in college I did a few projects of working on those things, but that's typically repertoire that soloists would play. I mean, it's not with orchestra, but it's meant to demonstrate virtuosity and just difficult, prowess on the instrument.
So the reason that I start with that is I've seen you play those pieces, which the things that I saw you do there with your fingers and your arms and your hands are almost like unbelievable to me. The amount of skill that you had compared to anything I've ever done. It's just orders of magnitude greater, and I don't think I'd ever seen anything, and I don't think I have ever seen anything match up to that in person since. And where that brings me is we started talking before we recorded with you telling me you were taking a lesson today before you went for your run.
Yeah.
And the natural question that leads me to, since you're about as trained as any violinist can be, and you're at the top of your field in a sense, what is it that you're doing in a lesson at this point? And who's teaching you?
I'm taking lessons now with one of the concertmasters of National Symphony. He's incredible.
Of the National Symphony?
Yeah, which is...
So that's like DC's symphony orchestra?
Right. He's incredible. He has so much experience. Like, he's like had a really, wide and impressive career. And
he's a violinist?
Yeah. He knows so much about the history and the context of all of this music. What we're doing, well, I'm working on concertmaster solos with him because...
Wait, so what is a concertmaster? Does he play in the orchestra?
Yeah, concertmaster is like the first chair. He's one of the co-concertmasters, so he like sometimes, sits second chair, but sometimes sits first, but,
Okay. But concertmaster is a position in the orchestra.
Right.
Because when I hear you say concertmaster, I think of someone like standing behind the orchestra with a whip, like shouting at everyone. But no, okay.
Well, some do act like that, but he's not. He's very sweet.
How old is he?
I don't know, 60s maybe, 50s or 60s.
Okay. I find myself very attracted to older men, not in a sexual way. Or, well, older men, I guess I don't want to be sexist about it, but maybe it's sort of a grandfatherly thing. But...
Oh, I see.
I'm gonna edit that part out of this conversation. Okay, so you just continue. Okay.
So we're working on concertmaster solos, which are solos that come up in symphonies for the first chair violinist. Um, and that's just, uh, I haven't played that repertoire that much, so it's nice to have this perspective. And also, there's so much more about these pieces than is just in the music. There's a lot of these pieces are, 200 years old, and you have to know what people have been doing for the last 200 years and what they're doing now and how that relates to how they used to do it. So there's just so much context that isn't written in the music that just
Hold on there. You have so to play a piece that is 200 years old, you have to know what people have been doing since then.
well, it helps them.
I would think it would be the opposite. That you would, well, maybe not the opposite, but to play a piece that's 200 years old, you need to know what people were doing in the 200 years before then, so that you're not really playing in a vacuum.
Well,
In that
well, that
sense.
too. So
Mm.
when you're basically we're interpreting the composer's ideas, and so you have to know the context that the composer was in to know what he was referring to and his like musical heritage. Um, but there's also because it's not just a written art form. There's a performance history. And so the way that people have approached the same piece of music for the last 200 years has changed. Our instruments have changed.
I
Like,
see.
we didn't have metal strings on the violin until like the 1970s or 80s. And before that,
And you have metal strings on your violin?
yeah, now everybody uses metal wound strings. But before that, they were all gut
Huh.
strings. Um,
I'm surprised that that at the highest level they don't have you going out and catching deer and stringing your own violin.
well, well, they made it so that it's better. I mean, it's adapted to our current musical environment. Like, they're much louder than gut strings, like a lot louder and a lot more durable. So uh, concert halls now are much bigger than they used to be, and they hold a lot more people. So it's a lot harder to project than like say in Bach's time, like 300 years ago, when music was only happening in a church, and those are notoriously echoey. So like a smaller sound could carry further. And so gut strings sound really good in churches because uh, they have a softer sort of more delicate timbre, you know. But you play gut strings differently than you play metal strings. So just the way that people play violin has evolved, and so there's a lot that goes into it. It's like an oral history because, um, I mean, now there's recordings. There's recordings for like the last 60 years of videos, or maybe even 100, but the quality of the older recordings aren't that good. So, we do have some idea of the way that people used to play, and it's very different. It's very different. And to make an educated sort of decision about all these things, you kind of have to know, I mean, especially the way that people play it now. And so that's helpful to know. But also, I'm just taking lessons because um, basically there is continuous growth that happens. Like, my playing is continually evolving. It's like there is no peak. There's only development. There's no like if my playing stops changing, then that's going to be a problem. So having somebody to listen to me play and to tell me what they think, no matter who it is, I mean, it's helpful that um, Ricardo has like such a great ear and such, um, you know, and is a really good teacher as well. That's really helpful. But really, just being able to play for anybody and hearing their feedback um, is a really valuable tool in my own personal um, development.
Tell me if this analogy is at all apt, but I imagine that Hemingway had a pretty firm mastery of English grammar and mechanics by the time he was 30, and then for the next X decades his style was constantly changing and evolving, but it was separate from technical development. So is that kind of what you're saying? And that it's not like when you're taking a lesson, you're not learning, uh, you're not really refining rudimentary techniques or even learning new techniques, but it's a development of style or character or something less tangible.
Um, yeah, that's part of it. I mean, the fundamentals, I mean, obviously, I don't really need to relearn how to play. You know, I have the fundamentals because uh, I've made it to a certain point. But even that, it's if you aren't constantly playing and refining and reflecting, it's easy to slip into a place where you know you're playing the way your body sort of approaches the instrument goes somewhere that you don't want it to go. So just getting too tense, it can creep up on you and then affect your playing without you realizing it if you're not sort of constantly aware. Uh, there's a lot of aspects to playing the violin itself um, that, um, you know, it's just a very all-encompassing pursuit. It's intellectual, it's physical, it's emotional. It has,
Tell me about the intellectual aspect.
okay,
Because I mean, the physical is obvious. I mean, you're moving around, and then emotionally, you're feeling something with the music. But what's is the intellectual motivation or aspect of it just understanding the context and the history behind the pieces?
um,
I mean, that's part of
that's
it.
part of it, the history. I mean, but also these pieces are like even if you look at the music apart, you know, you don't even have the violin in your hands. You have to kind of analyze it like it's a poem. You have to figure out why the composer wrote everything that he wrote, um, uh, and piece it together because every little marking that he wrote on the music is meaningful, you know. And so,
That's fascinating. I'd never that hadn't ever really occurred to me. That it I like uh, the
yeah.
poem
And
connection.
so a lot of the time, I mean, it's very rare that you're going to hear those recitals that you were mentioned before, where it's just a single violin alone. Most, like 99% of the repertoire that I play is with other people. So my part is,
Have,
yeah, my part is within the context.
I was going to ask if.
My
Go
part
ahead.
is within the context
Go ahead.
um, of these other musical lines. So like I have to understand what their part is too, and how my part interacts with theirs. So there's also harmony, which is looking at music vertically, uh, like uh, like in a single instant, all the notes that are happening, and they make chords, and you sort of see like there's tendencies for different chords, so they lean different ways, and you analyze it that way too, as well as melodically, which is more horizontal, just seeing where the way that the melody flows. So that's one aspect of it intellectually, but another aspect of it intellectually, uh,
Well, before we go to the next aspect, I'm wondering if you can tell me if you've ever had this experience that I've had with reading poetry, and you probably have too, where you have a poem before you and you read it a couple of times, and maybe you have read it many times, but you think you understand it, uh, but there's something off about it that you just don't like or isn't resonating. Maybe there's like a word or a phrase that you don't understand, or a word that you're interpreting incorrectly. But then once you figure out what that word or phrase means or that piece you're missing, you realize you were entirely wrong about the poem, and it changes how you view it entirely. And in this case, I'm wondering if like you might have been playing a, a violin piece in a certain way, trying to evoke a certain feeling, and there's just some tension between you and the music until you realize, oh, I was reading this note wrong. Now that I have it right, the whole piece makes sense to me. Or playing a phrase incorrectly or with the wrong emphasis, or has something like that ever happened?
Yes, definitely, all the time. I mean, so
Okay, cool. So we're on the
yeah,
same
I
page.
mean, it's not always as specific as like one note, but frequently, if you change your approach and change your perspective in a way, like, okay, say take, okay, second movement of Brahms Concerto. Uh, this was, I don't know, a year ago or so. I played it for somebody who's like, okay, so what is the affect you're going for? And I said, uh, like, anguished. And he was like, okay, that is not right. Like,
Huh.
I mean, he was like, try playing it um, like it's a prayer. What's the adjective he used? Prayerful, or yeah, just you know, the difference between prayerful and anguished. It's actually quite significant. But I mean, if you're just talking about them as words, but you don't really realize that when you're putting into music because obviously, a lot of this music is not, specific like that. It's just sort of what I put into it isn't exactly what's coming out, in terms of the way the audience hears it. So changing an approach like that, um, and now like hearing it again, I see like how that is actually a much more an interpretation that's much more true to what the music is and like is more realizing the full potential of the music. I just wanted to play something angsty, and so I was like, I want to play it anguish, but that's not actually what the music was about.
This is making the audition process make more sense to me, because I found it hard to understand how the judges, let's say judges listen to 30 violinists playing the same piece one after another behind a blind so they don't see who's playing it. And if you're all extremely technically proficient, I would assume that it would sound also similar, that you'd be indistinguishable. But now that I gather there's this subjective interpretive component, you might as well be playing different pieces of music, or that's possible. That I mean, the variation could be so
Well, yeah, actually,
significant,
something that was mentioned in my lesson today was
and you could
hilarious.
be wrong. Like
Right,
they might listen to a piece and say, "Oh, he doesn't understand it," even though he's playing it perfectly.
right. So
Hmm.
he said 98% of candidates, when you listen to them behind a screen in an audition, it sounds like they've never heard the piece before. Uh, and
Even though they've been practicing it for months.
right, I mean,
Hmm.
everyone's playing off the same music, but there's only so much you can put on the page. And if the people that are on the committee judging the auditionees, they've played this piece for the last 20 years over and over again, basically every other year or so. So they really know how it goes and they have it playing in their head when they're listening. And so if the person is doing exactly what's on the page, um, that's only, you know, half of how the music is actually played. Um, there, there's a certain affect that you figure out when you play it and when you really know the music. So, yeah.
Now, so I play the drums and I read drum music, and I know that, okay, so a quarter note on the third bar, or I guess I don't even know what it would be called, the third notch up. It means to hit the snare drum. But I know that hitting the snare drum can mean like 1,000 different things. But I don't play the violin. So I'm wondering if there's just a note on the page. What is it that these 30 violinists could do differently to that one note that might, what are the sort of variations on that one note that might make it sound like they're playing different pieces? Obviously, it would be multiple notes in succession, but is it, and I mean like very specifically, oh, they're moving their bow a little off to get a slightly different sound, or they're releasing their fingers from the strings just a little bit quicker, or it's a slightly harsher draw.
Yeah. Well, so this is more, yeah, this is getting into the technique of it, which, I mean, you could think of as the physical aspect of playing, because obviously you're moving your body, but I also think that there's an intellectual component to it. Uh, so if we're just talking about the different types of expression you can have on a single note, uh, just at a fundamental level, you could pull your bow a different speed. You could play different distance from the bridge. Um, you could play with more or less pressure. You can use your vibrato differently to, go faster or slower. And these are all like pulling different types of sound out of your instrument. What I find really rewarding about playing the instrument, just from a player's perspective, is this feeling that you get when you hit a sweet spot. When you're working with the instrument like exactly the way that the instrument sort of likes to be played. And I think about it a lot with relation to like tennis or golf or soccer, with all these sports that have those swing, and when you've made like contact in the sweet spot of your racket, or just you've hit the ball like in the most optimal way, so that your shot is like very direct and like exactly where you want it to go.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, if we're talking about that one note, there's no one way to play it, because you're trying to express something. So like it's just sort of subjective. It's an emotional thing, but sometimes the instrument itself, it can speak in an optimal way if you have this type of swing, or if you you know um, if you play it in that way, you can get the most optimal sound out of your instrument. So I feel like 90% of what people hear when they're listening behind a screen in an audition, say, or even in a concert, because most people haven't analyzed the piece that you're playing. So sort of the really intellectual decisions that you make as an artist sort of go over people's heads unless they've heard this concerto 20 times played by people that have made different choices, and so they understand the significance of your decisions, right? But most people aren't violinists and haven't studied this repertoire so in-depthly. So what is it that they really connect to? It's the sound quality. And just if it sounds like you're struggling to make a sound, or no matter what that sound is, like it's not really going to come across in a positive way. So there's this sort of effortlessness that I find very appealing when I hear people playing, and even with that effortlessness, you can play the same note in different ways, but it's sort of like just an attraction that people have to it, because you can hear like when you're watching. Why do people watch golf? You know what I mean? It's the most boring sport ever.
Yes.
But there's something about
Yeah.
watching someone swing, like the most efficient swing possible, that you can feel like the sweep and that contact that comes at the perfect time. There's something about watching that swing that is satisfying. And Um, so
For the non-golfer.
yeah, I mean, I don't even play golf.
Right. Well, I've never played golf, but I can imagine that. Like yesterday, I watched a woman on this course over here while I was rucking swing, and she'd like been practicing her swing, and for a couple minutes, and then she swung and just missed the ball completely. And I was thinking, I mean, I would probably do that too. And golf is, I can just imagine that golf is so extraordinarily difficult that watching, if you're a golfer, watching a good golfer golf is so thrilling.
Yeah, I mean, those
But
golf tournaments, all those
I still
yeah,
understand what
all
you're
those
saying.
guys, they're hitting all the same shots. You know, they're playing the same course. There's sort of a strategy. They probably all have like a similar strategy with whatever shot they're taking. You know, it's not like they're doing anything that differently, and yet some people win and some people lose. Um,
Hmm.
so there's an art to the swing as well. And so, no, even though it's physical, you know, I think that's an intellectual aspect to it that I personally find that one of the most rewarding aspects of playing, just because it's so tangible. Like it's you can feel it. You can feel the violin respond differently when when you're when you're operating it with a certain, you know, in a certain way. And it's
So pitcher,
yeah.
I was going to say pitchers. I think in baseball, that from doing all of this repetitive movement, they develop some serious joint issues. Just do you have anything like that from playing the violin?
Oh yeah. I mean,
Really?
every
Like what's going on?
my left shoulder is really it's kind of stiff all the time just because you hold the instrument there and I mean ideally you got to be really relaxed but you know if I'm playing an orchestra yesterday I played this concert the one piece Beethoven Missa Solemnis it was an hour and 20 minutes long and you sort of get tired you can't like have perfect posture the whole time you just it's hard so yeah, I have to make sure to stretch and stay physically active, you know, doing a lot of different motions than violin to balance it out. But musicians has one of the highest rate of career-ending injuries because a little thing could go wrong and then you can't play, you know.
Yeah.
So, and also it's repetitive stress causes a lot of injuries. Tendonitis gets a lot of people and just as you age, it gets harder also to maintain that pristine level of precision. Uh, so yeah, but even if you're not injured, you could have an off day. You know, it requires like a flow-like mental state sometimes to achieve that optimal sort of way of playing. So it's kind of intangible sometimes. Uh, what's the difference between like something that's fantastic and something that's just like correct?
How do you get into that mental state?
So this is another aspect of playing that is intellectually stimulating. Um, it is an exploration of yourself and of your own mind because performance um, performance itself is such a weird thing. Like no matter what you're performing, if you're performing sports, if you're performing theater, you know, or music, like stage fright, you get nervous, and even if you don't think you should be, you just do. And personally, the way I deal with that is I just like to know, I like to understand it. I want to know what's going on in my head and why, and like what happens when I get nervous in my head. Uh, and what I can do to counteract that. So, uh, sometimes, they typically, people say like, clear your mind, like the Zen approach is just meditate, focus on your breathing, um, and just allow your thoughts to like come and go, and then like eventually they'll sort of clear and your mind will be sort of still, like, like a pond or something like that, with no breeze. Um, I find that sometimes works, but once you get nervous, it's a fragile state. It really is hard to maintain that when there's some pressure on it. If you're in your, you know, second hour of meditation, then that's perfect. But you, if you need to get there like that, right, you step on stage and you need to get there within 1 or 2 breaths. Um, that doesn't always work for me. So um, hearing the music in my head uh, is a way to like, it's like a visualization technique, but with sound. Um, and that gets me closer to where I need to be mentally, because it gives my mind focus and I'm not like just thinking of like, okay, like, because you can't really think of nothing, it's easier to think of something. So it gives me a way to channel whatever extra energy that I'm feeling from nerves or whatever it is I'm feeling. So yeah, that visualization of the music is usually where I try to aim my thoughts. But even like, if I didn't play my violin, the idea of aiming my thoughts would, I wouldn't like come across that idea in normal life. And now because I aim my thoughts for violin, like, it comes up all the time, like in sports and
When you're playing
yeah,
basketball,
or
are you playing in DC much?
uh, I was playing pickup, once or twice a week, but I fell on my wrist, so I decided to take a little time off.
Yeah, that's not good. Yeah, I was thinking as you were talking about when I feel most in that state of mind, and it's usually when I'm lifting. Particularly, I'm thinking about yesterday, uh, benching pretty heavy and having that barbell loaded with hundreds of pounds right over my face, and that really clears your mind pretty quickly. And if it doesn't, then there might be a
Yeah.
problem. But also, when I'm drumming, I think my mind is pretty clear. When I warm up every day by going through the rudiments, and I do one rudiment every day. And when I go through the 40, I start over again. So today it was the triple tap Radamacue, and I just start at a pretty low BPM and then work up to a record BPM, even if it's just beating my past record by one. And if I can't do that, then I match it with a different pair of sticks or something like that. But when I'm doing that, the repetitive motion, just I get pretty zoned
Yeah.
into it.
I,
But when I most want to be in the zone is when I'm writing, and that doesn't happen very often, sadly.
I do a similar practice every morning. I wake up and just the first thing I do is like an hour of scales. I just find it to be very centering for the rest of my day, even if that's the only time I play violin that day. You know, uh, I just feel more centered moving forward just from having that time focusing on the fundamentals and going through things slowly and getting it faster like that.
Now, presumably, you're not developing your style by going through scales, but are you getting better at something when you're doing the scales? Or is it more of a mental practice and then a skill maintenance type of exercise?
Uh,
Because for me, when I'm doing this, I'm still getting better. I don't have anywhere near the technical proficiency that you have.
Um, it's skill maintenance, but I think a lot of it is maintenance. But uh, there's so many different ways to approach just playing that I can I can do the same stroke and one day just feel it differently, like feel how it feels um, differently. So I sort of just experiment with different feelings. Like I mean, in my body, not emotional feelings usually, um, but uh, kinesthetic feelings. Right? That is that the word? Yeah. Um,
Kinesthetic is like your body awareness.
yeah. So doing something slowly because muscle memory is such a big part of the violin. You know, there's no frets, so you just know where the notes are because your fingers know. So I just remind myself, basically. I'm just reminding myself every morning where those pitches are, what it feels like to pull the bow in a really optimal and relaxed way. And well, actually, something I I, I used to lift a lot, and I that that comparison with lifting and violin is um, optimal, or it's striking in some ways, you know, is you have to perform under pressure because when there's weight above your head, you better like lift it up or otherwise, you know, you're going to get hurt. Um, the situation isn't as dire if violin. Nobody's going to get hurt if you mess up, but just your pride. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but something about lifting that simplifies it is that the more you work, the stronger you get in a lot of ways. I mean, obviously that's not an ultimate rule. You need rest days and you need to like have a plan for training. But like if you're trying to lift something heavy, you have to push harder than if you're trying to lift something light. Uh, and that is where sometimes it can differ from violin because just when you try too hard, the instrument doesn't take it. And well, I think it's a difficult balance to strike because you know that book, The Talent Code? So,
Yeah.
well,
No. Who wrote it?
I don't remember, but in it, it's a famous sort of comment that the author makes that 10,000 hours of practice is what it takes for anybody to be. Uh,
Well, I think Malcolm Gladwell came up with that
okay,
10,000 hour rule,
so
but I think it's pretty debunked, but it doesn't matter. It still sounds nice.
well, yeah, for violin, no, for a lot of things. I mean, they take work, but what is
Yes.
it that you're doing when you're improving? For me, it's more straightforward. When you're improving, when you're lifting, you're getting stronger. Uh, it's less, it's harder to put your finger on it when you're working on a skill or an art form like that, like writing probably.
Well, lifting is a skill, but I understand what you're
Yeah, but
saying.
you don't work.
It's yeah, it's much different. Pardon? Yeah, at least with lifting, there's a single metric by which you gauge whether or
Right.
not you're improving.
I mean, because you can lift a lot.
I mean, other than whether you're injured or something like that, or if it's making you happy, but generally it's
Right.
how much weight you're
But you
lifting.
can also, you know, you can lift a lot of weight improperly. Like somebody that is really strong can have, you know, can lift improperly and be bad at lifting, but still lift a lot.
Uh
Um,
huh.
whereas the metaphor doesn't, or the parallel doesn't move into the arts.
talking about kinesthetic awareness and something that the rudiments do for me. So, if you are you wearing socks right now?
No,
All right, look down
I'm
at your
wearing pants
toes.
though.
Well, no, you don't have to stand. Just look down at your toes. But I mean, you can move all of your toes, right? I mean, you can bend them and open them. But can you move your big toe in a circle without moving any of the other toes? And then can you move it in a circle in the other direction?
No, neither
My
circle.
guess, yeah, is my guess was no. And most people can't do that. I can do that because I like took a long time of staring at my toes and getting and like developing that awareness. And that's a long story why I
That's like
went
Kill
through that.
Bill.
But
You know,
is it?
that scene where she comes out of a coma by willing her.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I do know what you're talking about. That's funny. But it amazes me. I mean, generally we're not confronted with our body not able to listen to our mind's cues. But if you try to bend your middle
Yeah,
toe without bending any of your other ones, you just can't make that connection to your toe for
yeah,
whatever reason. And when I'm drumming, I focus on this particularly when I'm doing the rudiments. The stroke with my right hand of the drumstick, if you track the head as it's bouncing off the drum and then coming up, it's not straight. It like goes down and then it kind of like goes like that on the way up, like a very elongated S. And unless I am moving it so slowly, I just can't get it to come back up on my right hand without making like a little S. And it just drives me nuts.
because you're
But
left-handed.
it's that kinesthetic awareness. Yeah, because I'm left-handed. But I'm just trying to develop by focusing on it as I do the rudiments. I'm just trying to develop the awareness of what's going on in my right hand so I can make that stop. And it has gotten better. It's another thing like with my left hand, I can just use my fingers to roll pretty fast. But with my right hand, I can only do like three or two or three. And then like my fingers just stop hitting the stick at the precise rate and force that they need to get it to bounce. Uh, so that I mean that's what I say. I'm like really working on these very small fundamental movements when I'm doing the
Yeah,
rudiments. But you've developed a lot of that. But I imagine that there are times when you started out where your fingers just aren't moving fast enough or they're not moving the way you want them to. Even, I mean, later on when you were doing the Paganini, I imagine that took a lot
yeah.
of practicing.
Well, it's endless. I mean, you can always do it. You can always find a way to do it better, more efficiently, more effortlessly. So, and like my sort of perception changes as my abilities change. So like my feeling
Yeah.
of how my competence basically just doesn't change. So it's just endless.
Really. I would have thought that as you know more and learn more, you start to think that you're a shittier and shittier violinist.
Oh, that too. Well, yeah, but then I guess it comes in waves because they're not changing at the exact same times. Like, when I see a
Mhm.
performance that really opens my eyes to something that I'm not doing, then it's crazy, and I sort of get obsessive about working on that, you know. And then I plateau for a while because I don't see the problem in my own playing that exists until I do see it, and then I can change it, you know.
So, something that I don't think we've talked about this since high school, but I remember you telling me that you would practice while you were dreaming, and I'm wondering if you still practice while you're dreaming.
You mean like
And
lucid
if
dreaming? Or
I'll leave it open.
so uh, I do sometimes do a mental practice. Um, just I find it helpful to organize my approach before I pick up the instrument. If I need to memorize something, to like really know that I have it in my head before I even try to play it. Uh, and the funny thing about mental practicing is that it makes me sleepy. So uh, oftentimes mental practicing is a euphemism for taking a nap. Um, but but I wake
I
up
like
from the
that.
nap in a different place than with the music than I go to sleep. So I do often go to sleep even at night, um, just thinking about music. In that same way, actually, that I described trying to find that flow state. If I'm having trouble falling asleep, I'll try and just channel my thoughts into like singing a piece of music in my head or playing a piece of music in my head, uh, and that leads me to sleep. Actually, uh, I can't say that I'm actually practicing while I'm asleep, but it takes you to a different mental state. So in a sense, it's dreaming, even if you're
Hmm.
awake. If you're in that sort of flow state, even if you're not playing, it's just your head is in that space. Um, it's a form of I would, I mean, it's a form of practice and it's a form of dreaming. So yeah, I guess you could call it dream practicing.
Got it. So a couple things come to mind. The first is, so I think of you as a violinist, and like when I say that, I mean I think of that as your primary activity. I mean, I think of you as Ethan as a person, and we had this conversation a long time ago, like whether you wanted to be a violinist or a person, and you chose being a person. And but but I think of you as a violinist, and that I think of that as your main activity. And for me, I even though I do a variety of things, as do you, I think of myself primarily as a writer. And when I am, this is something that I've noticed. I've only noticed this very recently, and it's come from being more introspective. But when I get in bed, I know that I'm about to fall asleep when my thoughts are no longer coherent. Like, have you noticed that where you like get to a state where you're lying there and then your eyes are closed and then you're just thinking a blueberry pie last
Yeah,
week. Like, and you didn't even have blueberry pie, but it's just like there are words and random
yeah.
things coming into your mind. Yeah. So I noticed that around that time, and typically like just before that time, I'm still not really aware of what's going on in my head, but things I'll have been writing about or want to be writing about, I'll have a lot of thoughts just come into my mind around then, and I'll have to occasionally say, I'm going to change her name so that she doesn't wake up. Hey, Bleary, take a note. And, but, or I'll just roll over and write the note if it's long enough. But in that sort of window before you fall asleep, is there a lot of musical activity going on, even if you're not consciously singing a piece like you've just
Uh,
described? Like, is it a revelatory period?
um, Sometimes I would say yes, in that a lot of the ideas I want to try out in my next day's practice come about when I'm not practicing. But I can't really write it down, like the things that I find, the revelations that I have, or the avenues that I want to pursue. uh, aren't really concrete enough for me to be able to like put it into words. Um, so it's more of a feeling, and sometimes that comes right before sleep, just in that mental clarity of sort of not thinking lucidly, but still thinking about music or writing or whatever it is. Um, but actually, that's more when I'm napping. Not, I do have that when I nap, but not like when I go to sleep at night. And oftentimes,
Hmm.
like when I wake up from a nap and I'm kind of groggy and sort of in that not quite awake state, that's when I more relate to what you're talking about. And that maybe I just remember it better because I wake up afterwards instead of going to sleep. Um, and then I wake up and I'm right by my violin and I can try it out.
So when I first asked you about dreaming, this is probably a conversation that we had like on a school bus to a soccer game or something like that. But when I last played video games was in middle school, and I would play this game Warcraft. Like over the summer, that's all I would do if I had free times. I'd play Warcraft 3. I'd stay up super late and until I like had to go to sleep, then I would go to bed. But as soon as I got in bed, like as soon as I closed my eyes, even before I'd fall asleep, I'd be seeing work. I'd be like playing Warcraft or seeing Warcraft as if I were daydreaming it. And then that's what I would dream about. I'd just be playing Warcraft while I was dreaming. And I think when I told you this in high school, you said that something similar to you would happen when you were dreaming, and that you would, because you played violin so much, you would just be with a violin in your sleep and playing. But so if that's you don't have that experience anymore.
Uh,
I also think you play violin less than you
well,
did back then.
I probably play more than I didn't. I practice 4 hours a day. That's my number, but then I have rehearsals and stuff. But I now practice basically exclusively in the morning. I find that I'm the most productive and just get the most work done. Whereas in high school,
And I see that
yeah,
might
because in high school I
have an
would
effect.
practice like the only time I had was like, you know, at night right before going to sleep. So that sort of would do that um,
Hmm.
to my sleep, I guess. But I still find, I mean, some people don't like practicing in the morning. I just find like, it makes my day better and gives me, I have more clarity and energy to work on things right first thing in the morning. So, yeah,
Got it. All right, Ethan. That's all I got for today.
awesome.
Thanks
Yeah,
again.
it's fun.